In the center of Ethiopia's capital stands a palace that has shaped the country's history for more than a century. Unlike many royal residences around the world, this is not simply a monument to the past. It remains one of the most important centers of political power in Ethiopia, and large parts of the complex are still closed to the public. Known as Menelik Palace, or the Imperial Palace, this vast compound has witnessed the rise of emperors, the birth of modern Ethiopia, foreign invasions, revolutions, and the country's transformation into the nation it is today. For generations, decisions made behind these walls influenced millions of people, making the palace far more than an impressive collection of historic buildings. Most travelers who visit Addis Ababa never see what lies beyond its gates. The palace has long served as the seat of government, and today it continues to house the offices and official residence of Ethiopia's prime minister. While part of the historic grounds has recently become accessible through Unity Park, much of the original complex remains off-limits, adding to the mystery surrounding one of Africa's most significant royal residences. Unlike the grand palaces of Europe, Menelik Palace was never built simply to display wealth or royal prestige. From the very beginning, it functioned as the center of government, where military campaigns were planned, foreign diplomats were received, and the future of Ethiopia was shaped. As the city of Addis Ababa grew around it, the palace became the heart of a new capital and eventually the political heart of the entire country. Its story begins with one extraordinary ruler whose vision changed Ethiopia forever. Emperor Menelik II did far more than build a palace. He founded a capital, expanded his empire, modernized the country, and led one of the most famous victories in African history. To understand why this palace remains so important today, we first have to understand the man who built it. The story of Menelik Palace cannot be separated from the story of Emperor Menelik II, one of the most influential rulers in Ethiopian history. When he came to power in the late 19th century, Ethiopia was entering a period of profound change. The country was expanding, its government was becoming more centralized, and the emperor wanted a capital that could reflect the growing importance of his empire. Until then, Ethiopian rulers had often moved their courts from one location to another, but Menelik II envisioned something different. He wanted a permanent political center where government, diplomacy, and military leadership could all be based in one place. In 1886, he established a new capital that would become known as Addis Ababa, a name that means new flower. The location was carefully chosen. Sitting at more than 2,300 meters above sea level, the area offered a mild climate, fresh water, fertile land, and a strategic position in the Ethiopian highlands. What had once been a sparsely populated area soon became the center of one of Africa's oldest independent states. At the highest point of the new capital, Menelik II ordered the construction of his palace. More than a royal residence, it was designed as the headquarters of an empire. Government officials, military commanders, foreign diplomats, and religious leaders all gathered here, making the palace the place where the country's most important decisions were made. From these halls, Menelik II launched ambitious reforms that helped modernize Ethiopia. During his reign, the country introduced its first railway connecting Addis Ababa to the port of Djibouti, expanded road networks, developed modern schools and hospitals, and strengthened diplomatic relations with countries across Europe and the Middle East. Many of the foundations of modern Ethiopia were established during this period, with the palace serving as the center of both political leadership and national development. The palace also became closely associated with one of the defining moments in African history. In 1896, Ethiopia defeated invading Italian forces at the Battle of Adwa, becoming one of the very few African nations to successfully resist European colonial expansion during the scramble for Africa. The victory made Menelik II an internationally respected leader and turned Ethiopia into a powerful symbol of independence across the continent. Although the battle itself took place hundreds of kilometers from Addis Ababa, many of the preparations, military discussions, and political decisions leading up to that victory were made within the palace complex. As Ethiopia's influence continued to grow, so did the palace. New buildings were added, churches were constructed within the grounds, gardens expanded across the hilltop, and the complex gradually evolved into a small city behind its walls. It was no longer simply the home of an emperor. It had become the political, administrative, and symbolic center of an entire nation. More than a century later, that role has never completely disappeared. While Ethiopia has changed dramatically since the days of Menelik II, the palace he built continues to stand at the center of the country's political life, connecting modern Ethiopia with the vision of the ruler who founded its capital. By the beginning of the 20th century, Menelik Palace had grown into one of the most important political centers in Africa. Behind its walls stood far more than the emperor's residence. The complex functioned as the headquarters of an empire, where government officials worked, military leaders met, foreign diplomats were received, and religious ceremonies reinforced the close relationship between the Ethiopian monarchy and the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. Unlike many European palaces designed around grand ceremonial halls, Menelik Palace developed gradually as new buildings were added whenever they were needed. Over time, the compound expanded into a network of residences, administrative offices, churches, reception halls, gardens, and service buildings spread across a large hill overlooking the growing city of Addis Ababa. Foreign ambassadors arriving at the palace were introduced to an Ethiopia that was rapidly modernizing while preserving its own traditions. Official receptions, diplomatic negotiations, and meetings with international visitors all took place within the complex. As European powers competed to expand their influence across Africa, Menelik Palace became the place where Ethiopia negotiated with the outside world while fiercely protecting its independence. Religion also played a central role in palace life. Several churches were built within the grounds, serving both the imperial family and members of the royal court. Important religious celebrations often took place inside the complex, reflecting the deep connection between the Ethiopian monarchy and the Orthodox faith. For generations, political authority and religious tradition existed side by side within the same walls. Although the palace served as the center of government, it was also a home. Members of the imperial family lived here. Servants maintained the grounds. Officials carried out their daily responsibilities, and hundreds of people worked behind the scenes to keep the complex functioning. At almost any hour of the day, the palace was filled with activity, from formal ceremonies and political meetings to the ordinary routines of those who lived and worked inside. Many original structures from Menelik II's reign still survive today, although the complex has continued to evolve over more than a century. Some buildings have been restored, others expanded, and new government facilities have been added as Ethiopia's political system changed. Despite these transformations, the palace has never lost its original purpose. It remains a place where national decisions are made, linking the country's modern leadership with a site that has stood at the center of Ethiopian history since the founding of Addis Ababa. While much of this activity takes place behind closed gates, enough is known about the palace to reveal that it was designed as an entire seat of government rather than a single royal residence. That raises another question. What exactly lies beyond those walls today, and why do so few people ever get to see it? From the outside, Menelik Palace appears to be a heavily guarded government complex hidden behind walls and trees. What many people do not realize is that the palace is not a single building, but a vast collection of historic and modern structures covering a large area in the center of Addis Ababa. At the heart of the complex stands the original imperial residence built for Menelik II. Around it are additional palaces, reception halls, administrative offices, and several historic churches that have played an important role in Ethiopia's royal tradition. Many of these buildings were expanded or renovated by later rulers, creating a complex that reflects more than a century of Ethiopian history. One of the most significant landmarks inside the grounds is the former throne hall, where emperors welcomed foreign dignitaries, held official ceremonies, and conducted affairs of state. Nearby are private residences once used by members of the imperial family, along with gardens that offered a quiet retreat from the growing capital outside the palace walls. The complex is also home to several monuments, memorials, and religious buildings connected to Ethiopia's monarchy. These sites preserve the memory of rulers who shaped the country's history and highlight the close relationship between the Ethiopian state and the Orthodox Church. In recent years, one section of the palace grounds was transformed into Unity Park, allowing visitors to enter an area that had remained closed for generations. The park includes restored historic buildings, landscaped gardens, museums, and exhibition spaces that introduce visitors to Ethiopia's imperial history. For the first time, tourists gained access to a small part of what had once been one of the country's most restricted places. Even so, Unity Park represents only a portion of the original palace complex. The majority of the grounds remain protected because they continue to serve as the headquarters and official residence of Ethiopia's prime minister. Security is extremely strict. Photography is limited in many areas, and access beyond the public sections is not permitted. That combination of history and active government makes Menelik Palace unusual. Unlike many royal residences that now function only as museums, this complex continues to play the role for which it was originally built more than a century ago. It remains a place where the past and the present exist side by side, making it one of the few historic palaces in Africa that has never completely lost its political importance. Few historic palaces continue to shape the future of their country long after the rulers who built them are gone. Menelik Palace is one of those rare exceptions. More than a century after Emperor Menelik II chose this hilltop as the center of his new capital, it remains one of the most important places in Ethiopia. Its walls have witnessed the founding of Addis Ababa, the modernization of the country, the arrival of foreign leaders, moments of national triumph, and periods of enormous political change. While governments have changed over the decades, the palace has remained the place where many of Ethiopia's most important decisions continue to be made. For most visitors, Menelik Palace will always remain partly hidden. Unlike famous royal residences that welcome millions of tourists every year, much of this complex is still closed to the public, adding to its sense of mystery. Only a small section can be explored through Unity Park, while the rest continues to serve the same purpose it was built for more than 100 years ago. Perhaps that is what makes Menelik Palace so remarkable. It is not simply a monument preserved for history books or a royal residence frozen in time. It is a living part of Ethiopia's government, standing as a bridge between the country's imperial past and its modern future. In a city filled with museums, churches, and historic landmarks, Menelik Palace remains the place where Ethiopia's story is still being written.